Rosh Hashiva and the Kohen and
Cohen and
the monarch. Yeah, the monarch of Ranana. Okay. Okay. Rav Yecheskel Pennant of the Mara Yecheskel condemns people who have the exaltation of Hashem in their mouths and the sword of deceit in their hands. I see in our times people slaughter newborn calves and are not careful to wait 8 days after the birth, as required by the Torah, and consequently feed non-kosher meat to Jews. The root of this misconduct is because people do not conduct their business with integrity. Therefore, the butcher is reluctant to buy a newborn calf and leave it to the owner to nurse for a few days, lest the competitor might offer more money and buy it. I daily confront such cases of deceitful behavior. For example, a person gives money to his friend to buy him an ox or a horse, and he goes and buys it for himself. Or two partners acquired a business, and afterwards one of them forces the other out of joint ownership.
I've seen that.
And many others like these, that according to Torah law, one cannot recover the loss. The common practice of deceit is worse than stealing, because one can be wary of a thief, but it is impossible to be wary of a cheater. This is what our sages intended when they cursed the deceiver. The one who exacted retribution from the generation of the flood and the generation of the dispersal will exact retribution from anyone who does not stand by his word. This wickedness is very great, for it destroys the world. A person cannot provide for himself without engaging in the business relationships with others. And when people deceive one another, it is impossible to conduct any manner of business. And lastly, as such, the Mara Yecheskel stresses a society that is not established on the foundations of justice and morals, and which people cannot trust one another, does not have the ability or merit to sustain itself. Consequently, our sages attribute destruction of the second commonwealth to the deterioration of social trust.
Oh, thanks, Kevin. It was actually quite interesting.
Yeah, it was. And Kevin, many a buck have not seen cheetahs either, apart from humans.
Yeah.
Yeah, just say that's
especially if they without passing each other. You mean also?
Yeah, cheetahs got 120 km an hour, just like normal cheetahs. You don't see them coming. I've often, unfortunately, seen people that have been forced out of their own business. It's just terrible. It's just terrible. Okay, so guys, we were talking about now we're talking about the loveliness of human nature, about a man assaulting his fellow man, even a Jew assaulting his fellow Jew. Now, last time we said that basically maybe a limb for a limb shouldn't be a limb for a limb, but a limb for a compensatory money amount, because what happens if you extract the limb from somebody and they die in the process because their body goes into shock? So therefore, it's better to take money as compensation instead of the reciprocal limb payment. So we say no. At the end of the day, there's a doctor that assesses it, and if the doctor says that there cannot be a limb that's removed, then the person is patur, not chayiv, just like in the case of treif or whatever the case may be. And if he happens to have died, it's like going into surgery and the doctor made you fit for surgery, but things got complicated in the operating room. So we're saying that, no, you can't do that. And how did we get that? We said a pasuk, an eye for an eye and not eye for a life. So that's how it came to that. And then it brought that point in Sanhedrin that Gavin and I learned, if that person was a little bit delicate, well, it's actually from Makot 22b, and he gets lashes. The court agent gives him lashes after the doctor gives the court agent the go-ahead that the assailant is strong enough to receive the lashes, and his soul departs from his body. The court agent doesn't end up going to the city of refuge for an inadvertent killing, because the doctor assessed it. Why the doctor doesn't go is because he didn't actually cause the death directly. But in Shemaim, if he was negligent, there's a problem. So there's no proof from this that payment for damage is monetary. That's because we worry that the soul might depart if you extract a limb. So all we've done, guys, is we looked at every avenue, and there doesn't seem to be there doesn't seem to be conclusive evidence that it's only monetary payment. Guys, I don't know why I'm tongue twisting. My blood sugar.
I've got a concept.
Yeah, tell me.
I've got a concept. Okay. You say like a limb for a limb. So I don't want to eat the other guy's leg. What am I going to do with his jacked up leg? Anyway.
Actually, Arthur's correct, by the way, is that if you have to look at the usefulness of a limb for a limb, it's pretty useless to the victim because it doesn't compensate him for any losses in terms of medical, health, recovery, actual damage, time, pain, humiliation. So that's useless to get a limb for a limb. It might make you feel better that the guy is feeling an equal reciprocal damage, but what would you rather have, guys?
Well, a rich guy would say he wouldn't, but everybody else would rather take the money.
Gavin's raising a good point, but since the rich are in the 1%, we go with the halachic majority. So it's a good point, though, because most people are poor, middle class. And people have got enough
I know how to
sense.
hurt Damon.
I know.
Take money from him. It's more painful than losing a limb.
Exactly. Arthur knows me so well. One thing, guys, there's a second reason, is that Jews are not known to be cruel, and therefore we don't enjoy the punishment of seeing somebody else lose an organ just because they accidentally took us out of an organ, because it might have been in an accidental fight, meaning one person hit another and they might have cut themselves and lost a limb. It's not purposeful where they take a sword. Very often it's an accident when it comes to a brawl, but the person attacking that person, many times I saw a thing where one guy hit another guy and he died. That person that hit him said he's been living with this trauma for decades. And he, under Lad Bible, and he just said that he can't live with himself properly. So most people don't like to do that, even if they get in a brawl after a couple of drinks. So Arthur, your logic is good. So we're going to hit the new part of the Gemara and say, well, maybe there's inconclusive proof. So another proof that the penalty for damage may be monetary. Rav Zuvi, it said in the name of Rabbah, the verse states a wound for a wound, okay? As you know from Exodus, Shemot chapter 21, verse 25, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise, you know. So a wound for a wound seems a little bit superfluous because you've already almost stated it. So that's kind of a clue. So it's teaching, when you mention the word a wound for a wound, that there's liability for pain, even where there is liability for damage. In other words, what it's trying to tell you is that it's not just the actual medical damage you've caused, but the pain aspect. But it says, if it enters your mind, the Gemara, that the compensation for damage is an actual reciprocal wounding of the assailant, then just as the victim had pain when he was injured, this assailant also will have pain when the court wounds him. But why then must the assailant also make a monetary payment for the pain he inflicted? Obviously, an assailant is not wounded as compensation for damage, but pays money instead. So the Gemara is bringing a good thing. It's saying, look, Kevin, if you're paying for the actual medical damages, okay, apart from the actual damage of what the person has loss of earnings from their previous position as an employee to what they could do now, we're saying, listen, pain has a value. So how do we know pain has a value? Rabbi Khan has the most hysterical example. He says you're stuck in the middle of Iran and the Taliban are there, and you wave to a girl, or you might have pinched her in the tuchus. Wrong country to do that. He never mentioned. I'm just embellishing. So they want to cut off your hands. They want to cut off your hands. Now, the guy's about to chop your hands off, and he says, "How much will you pay me?" What do you call it? Generally, the assassin or the sword wielding court agent comes to the victim the night before and says, listen, you can either be clean coat sober for this, sober as a judge, or alternatively, I'll give you something to drink with a bit of sleeping pill. You'll be so hammered, you will barely feel it. I want to know how much money you'll give me for the anesthetic, because you're going to be so inebriated, you're going to go out of it. Now, what would you pay? You would pay anything not to feel that pain. So, we're also going to go in the Gemara and say, well, what is pain worth? But what it's saying is here, since the Gemara says you pay for the actual wound, okay, and then you pay for pain, what happens then? Because why pay for pain if you're going to create a wound for a wound or a limb for a limb? Because the person's going to have pain anyway. So why mention that extra pain? In other words, I take Kevin's limb, the court takes my limb. And in return, just like I caused Kevin pain, I get pain from the same reciprocal limb payment. And therefore, the pain aspect is taken care of reciprocally, as well as the actual wound, measure for measure. So then why would the Gemara state that you pay for pain? That's the Gemara's argument, if it was not a monetary payment for pain and a wound. Good argument, right? So the Gemara says, look, what's the difficulty? It rejects the proof. Perhaps involved in the wounding incident, there is a person who is delicate. He has more pain than normal, or maybe perhaps there's a person who is not delicate. In other words, he has little or no pain. Regarding what law is there a difference? To give the victim that which is the difference. In other words, what do we actually mean here? If a reciprocal wounding is the compensation for damage, the assailant will be suffering the same sort of pain experienced by his victim, and that alone should satisfy his pain obligation, meaning it's basically measure for measure. He caused pain, he gets pain. He caused the guy limb, he gets limb removed from him. So therefore, you don't need monetary compensation. It's possible to say that an assailant is wounded in the manner he wounded his victim as payment for his damage. And the phrase a wound for a wound teaches that at the same time, maybe monetary payment should be made for pain. We don't know that, but it's not proving that it's not a limb for a limb. So the teaching applies to where the assailant feels less pain than did his victim, and maybe the assailant must pay the difference. So we learned before there shall be one rule for all. So even if you do one rule for all, it's still that person has lost use of that particular limb, and so does this person, and that person felt pain. And while this person feels pain on a different level, it's still measure for measure in a general sense of concept, even if it's not exacting. So it's not a proof that it has to be about money. Can you see that, guys? If you don't, ask me any questions before we go on.
Well, David, it actually makes a lot of sense because from what we've been studying in the past, you cannot benefit more and then pay double for something. It doesn't make sense.
What do you mean? Let me see if I understand you.
Like if you, okay, so I damage your ox, okay, so I can't pay more than a certain amount. I can't pay like extra, like 2 oxes for damaging your ox. It's only the pain. If you already had the wound, you already had the pain, it's finished. You've gone through what the guy went through. You both can't do anything, but very slightly, but it's still, so, it doesn't make sense that you have to pay extra for something.
Okay,
because the other one can't benefit more than a certain amount. I mean, he's got revenge. It's done. Now he can't expect you. Okay, now I've got revenge, and you're missing leg. I want you to pay me X amount. It's not fair. Same with death penalty. You can't, or any other penalties. You can't have multiple penalties accumulating on one thing.
Okay, so that is a good point. The only issue that you generally have is that if the assailant is more sensitive to pain, then, I mean, say there's a little guy and that big guy says to this little guy, get out, I'm going to smack you. And the little guy's very shaky and picks up a crowbar and splits the femur in half of this big guy and he falls over. then the little guy, being quite delicate, might feel the pain of his own leg being broken much more than this big breaker, at which case the payment is more than the damage they cause on the pain aspect. But Arthur's right is that the pain isn't the primary issue. It's the wound. In other
Damon,
words, it's not the extraneous.
size has nothing to do with the pain. I can tell you, when I went for my thing in my arm, the guy put that thing up my arm. He said to me, I screamed like a baby. I'm a big dude. I screamed in agony. The guy says to me, I could never give birth. I said, that's fine. That's my wife's job. But besides that, the
It's
pain
true.
and size
That's
of a
true.
guy has nothing to do with it.
Arthur's actually right. So another proof that payment is for damage is monetary. So the Gemara is trying again. Rav Papa said in the name of Rava, the verse states regarding an assailant in Shmot, Exodus chapter 21, verse 19, he shall provide for healing. Okay? To teach that he must give money for the victim's healing, even where compensation is given for damage. In other words, damage is damage itself, and healing means the time where the person has to recuperate, the shevet part. Okay, so nezek is the actual damage. But the Gemara is saying maybe it enters your mind that compensation for damage is an actual reciprocal wounding of the assailant. Then just as this victim needs healing, so the assailant needs healing also. So why must the assailant make a monetary payment for a victim's healing, but pay money instead? So that's a slightly stronger argument. It's saying that, look, the reciprocal wound requires healing. So then why would the Gemara ask for another payment for the victim in terms of healing? Now, for me, that's not a proof that it's money. That's actually a proof that it's a reciprocal wounding. So the Gemara is basically saying, yes, but then the Gemara is saying you still have to get extra for the healing. In other words, the assailant attacked the victim, he has to be healed. Now, the court damages the assailant in the same manner, and he has to go through healing, so it works itself out. The very fact that it's asking the person damaged, the assailant, for extra money for the victim regarding healing is proving it's a monetary payment. So the Gemara is saying no, because there's also difficulty. Perhaps involved in the wounding incident, you've got the same sort of case. Somebody's flesh heals quickly, and somebody else's flesh heals not so quickly. So regarding what law is there difference, to give the victim that which is the difference. In other words, it's possible to say that an assailant is wounded in the manner he wounded his victim, his payment for damage, and also that he shall provide for healing teaches at the same time a monetary payment is made for healing. So this teaching applies specifically to where the assailant heals more quickly than his victim. Okay? So the cost of his healing is basically less. In that case, the assailant must pay the victim the difference. Okay? But the problem is, it could be the other way around, where the victim heals more quickly than the assailant. So that way, you're just talking about general concepts of wounding, reciprocal wounding and reciprocal healing. So it's not necessarily guaranteed that money is the only way to make restitution here. Because as Arthur said, you've had your vengeance, not revenge. Revenge is when you're just trying to be punitive. Revenge is different to vengeance. Vengeance, Rav Simcha explained, was meting out justice measure for measure. Okay, so then it's been done. Wounding, wounding, healing, healing, pain, pain. Okay, so it doesn't have to be money. So there's no conclusive proof, and the Gemara tries one last proof that it could be monetary. Rav Ashi said it's derived through a Gezerah Shava with the word for. So what do we mean for? Is that it says a wound for a wound, a foot for a foot, etc., etc. So the common word for links the two passages to teach, just as there in the animal verse, the compensation is with money, so with regards to damage to a person, the compensation is money. Because we learn if you damage an animal, you have to pay with money to the owner in terms of compensation, whether you injure the animal or kill it. And it's not wound for wound. So it's using that Gezerah Shava. There's a slight problem. I mean, I can think of quite a few, by the way. The one is that nobody loses their life for killing an ox. You pay monetary payment. So who's to say one could lose their lose the same amount when you damage a person compared to an ox, because you've got all these other payments. But it still derives damages from an animal to damages to a person for nezek, and the rest of the damages are extra if you hurt a human being. So the Gemara is saying, look, there is a problem with this, because with this Gezerah Shav of using for, you shall surely pay for an ox, okay, and a wound for a wound, etc. So that particular superfluous word, that's where they derive. But the Gemara says, what do you see that causes you to derive a 4-4 Gezerah Shava from the ox verse? Let us derive, instead of 4-4, a Gezerah Shava from a verse that discusses the murder of a person. In other words, it's saying, if you want to get the rules of a person, discuss a case where somebody murdered a person, and the rules of man to man, you can get injury clarity from man to man. Why take it from animal to man? Even though you could say it's from injury to injury. So it's a reasonable response, because it's written, you shall give a life for a life. So the common word there is for. You can also make a Gezerah Shava there to teach that just as in the case, guys, of murder, when you take somebody's soul, that person's soul, the murderer, is taken. It's measure for measure. So too, when you take a limb, maybe you are having a limb taken from you, measure for measure. So the Gemara answers, in defense of Rav Ashi, maybe we should derive laws of injuries from other laws of injuries. In other words, those of a person from those of an animal. And we should not derive laws of injuries from laws of death, meaning the law of death is too hectic, and we need to have comparative fairnesses. So from the animal injury verse, we learn that the payment for human injury is with money. So that's what the Gemara is proposing. And then it rejects the thinking, because it says, on the contrary, why should you derive the laws pertaining to a person from other laws pertaining to a person? In other words, injury from murder. And we should not derive laws pertaining to a person from laws pertaining to an animal. Accordingly, we derive from the murder verse that an assailant actually loses an eye. So we're saying, listen, it can work just as well the other way around. So Rav Ashi says that he needs to find another source. And where does he go? To Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 22, verse 29. So the verse basically states that the attacker must remit a fine of 50 shekels in addition to regular compensatory payment to the father of the violated girl. So it's finding a completely different pasuk. So it says in Exodus chapter 21, verse 23, it also brings this, that one who violates a virgin shall give the father of the girls 50 shekels, for he had affected her. So in that particular way, we can see that it is a monetary compensation for injury. So then why don't we look at that law of injury and make sure if you take out somebody's limb, you have to pay monetary compensation instead? Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does make sense, because although I don't know how they'd violate the man in the same manner, because he doesn't have the same anatomy. Let's not be too specific. And you can't violate him from the rear end, because homosexuality is an abomination. So I don't know how you would do it apart from monetary compensation in that case. I'm just saying. So the Gemara basically has offered many proofs that compensation for damage is monetary, but it's now presenting an opposite view. So it's tried and tried and tried, and it's not conclusive. So it's saying maybe it actually is an eye for an eye, Because Rav Eliezer says an eye for an eye, actually, when you read it literally, denotes an actual removal of the eye. If you read it literally. So the Gemara says, do you really see it like that? That it works on an actual corporal punishment, you know? Does Rav Eliezer not hold that, like all the Tanaim who say that it means a monetary payment? Okay? Because the Gemara has never doubted that an assailant offers only monetary payment to his victim. Why? Because from the time of Moshe, every Sanhedrin, every Beis Din has never actually inflicted a reciprocal wound. So obviously we realize the end of the story, that it's got to be money. But what we're trying to do is work backwards and know how it works. That we know. So the Gemara is saying, but we know that all the Tanaim know it's money. How can Rav Eliezer argue? So Rabbah said, Rav Eliezer means to say that we don't assess the victim as he were a slave. Meaning you've got to look at, we've got to see the victim as a free man, not at his value sold as a slave. Okay, but that makes sense to a certain degree, because if you think about it, Gavin and I have always said, what happens if the person has his own business? Why do you assess him as a slave or an employee? Because that limits his earning potential. And the argument there is that, well, then the assailant will never end up paying back the debt because the guy could end up being a multimillionaire that he attacked. So it has to be a case of a compromise where both parties have to compromise and both parties are slightly miserable. Do you get what I'm saying, Gavin? So it has to be an employee sort of ratio instead of a person in their own business, which is like the slave market. So the Gemara says no, even though Rav Eliezer means to say that we don't assess the victim as a slave, it can't be, because the buyer said to Rabbah, rather, whom do we assess him? Like a free man. But does a free man have monetary value? So, in other words, it's clarifying that if you don't treat him as a slave, you treat him. Sorry, guys, my blood sugar's low. I'm getting my tongue twisted. You treat him as a free man. So, if a free man isn't owned, he can't be sold, and as a result, just lacks monetary market value. Do you get what I'm saying? That's one of the issues. But why that issue doesn't make sense to me is a free person is also worth a value on the employee market. So, Gavin, this part I don't quite understand in the Gemara. Do you get what I'm saying? Because their argument is if he's a free man, he doesn't have a value. And I'm saying that's not how the market works. When somebody does training and provides their services to me, I put a bit of a markup and resell those services. The trainer makes money. I make a bit of money. And it's a free market society where I pay for the value of that great service. And therefore, a person has to earn a living, whether in those days, even if he was a blacksmith, or even if he was ran a trade, that still has a value of a service per hour, or for the expertise. So, having refuted Rabbah, the Gemara offers another explanation. It says, rather Rav Ashi says, Rav Eliezer means to say that we do not assess the damage on the damaged party, but on the damager. So I'll tell you what that's about. If you looked at the kofir payment, okay, now we say, why do you pay the kofir? There's an opinion that the damager pays on what his life is worth. Because, Kevin, if you remember this, that the guy was negligent. He knows his ox is liable to kill. So he should lose his life for taking the life of another Jew. The only reason why he doesn't pay a life for a life is it was indirect that the ox did it, but it was through his negligence. And therefore, in Shemaim, they hold him responsible for losing his life. So Gavin, the damager, is actually paying on the value of his life, the kofir payment. Whereas the other opinion is that we pay on the life of the victim because they lost a breadwinner of what his value would be. Because they lost that value in terms of being able to earn as a family. So there's both those points of view. And we're saying here it's the same with damage. It could be on the damager. What's the value of the damager? Because God would say, the court would say to the assailant, how much would you pay to save your finger? So then it's based on the damager. But if we say, look at what that finger cost the victim, he can no longer type on the keyboard, then it's based on the damaged. So it depends how you assess it. All right, guys, we're going to end early. My blood sugar's low. I'm twisting words. I'm so sorry. Whenever it drops, I get tongue-tied. I'm so sorry.
No, it's 100%. We understand it. It was phenomenal. We covered good ground. We covered lots of.
What page is this, Damon? Just this page.
It's the 84th duff, 84
Okay.
A4, but we covered quite a bit of ground. Sorry, instead of using the word a symptom, I used the word system, or instead of using the word, yeah, I'm just getting a little bit tongue-tied at the moment, unfortunately. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. It was 4 times that you slipped up, and I didn't want to say anything. No, I'm joking, man. I didn't even pick up anything.
I believe you. It was Tommy when
I didn't even hear you slip up once. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
Well, I was sleeping so intensely, I heard nothing.
Okay. All right, guys, listen, just have a great night.
Yeah, you too, 100%.
Thank you for a great job, well done. If you think I'm a good teacher, you should see Gavin.
No, Damon's in a different league. I'm just teaching stuff that was designed by some what's it called? New Green Deal oak. That's
progressive person.
No, Kevin, you want to know the difference is Gavin can teach somebody that has no clue of computers, and at the end they're functional. That's something.
Yeah, but then I'm dysfunctional after that, but that's another story. Yeah.
I don't blame you. That can wear you out. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys. Just have a great.
You have to be able to train everyone. Damon, you can do the same. You're an outstanding teacher.
I wish I could teach you.
I'm teaching secular stuff. I wish I was teaching Torah. I wish I had the ability. I don't. Torah is too complicated.
In fact, what Gavin and Arthur should start doing is sharing every now and again some ideas with us. I want to get you guys into the habit because you guys are super capable. I nearly wished you a good Shabbos. My blood sugar's low. I don't know what flipping day it is. All right. Cheers. Good
Shabbos. Well, I'll tell you what. Arthur will talk about, I don't know, he'll come up with something, and I'll give you guys dating tips. That's what I'm good at. I'm not good at anything else.
Deal. Thanks.
Is that a deal?